1 month had passed since that fateful morning, and the impact continued to ripple through the community. Tiana stood before the mirror in her bedroom, running her fingers through her newly growing hair. It was different now, shorter, but somehow stronger, like she was. The morning news played quietly on her laptop, showing footage of the police department's latest community meeting. The chief stood at the podium, announcing sweeping changes to training protocols and accountability measures. "What happened to a brave young woman in our precinct," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room, "has changed how we approach our duty to protect and serve." At school, Tiana's college acceptance letters had started arriving. Her personal essay, which she had rewritten after the incident, had caught the attention of admissions officers across the country. She wrote about resilience, about justice, about how a moment of cruelty had transformed into a catalyst for change. The rookie officer who had recorded everything had been promoted to the Community Outreach Division. Her desk, once tucked away in a corner, now sat prominently in the precinct's main office. Young officers sought her out for advice, knowing she had chosen integrity over silence. In the courthouse downtown, Mitchell's case moved forward with unprecedented speed. His attempts to justify his actions fell flat in the face of clear video evidence and multiple witness testimonies. The judge, known for his fairness, had seen enough cases to know this one was different. Tiana's parents had turned their daughter's experience into a movement for change. Their law firm now handled similar cases across the state, pushing for accountability and swift action. Other departments looked to their precinct as an example of how to handle misconduct immediately and decisively. The police academy added new training modules focused on cultural sensitivity and civil rights. Cadets watched the body camera footage from that day, learning how a single officer's actions could destroy public trust and how another officer's courage could help restore it. Local barbershops and hair salons had started a program offering free services to survivors of trauma. The stylist who had helped Tiana that first day led the initiative, understanding that healing sometimes started with reclaiming one's appearance. In the precinct's break room, officers discussed cases differently now. The old habit of looking the other way had been replaced by a new understanding that their duty to the public included holding each other accountable. The thin blue line had been redrawn, with justice on the right side. The district attorney's office used the case as a template for handling police misconduct. "When we have clear evidence," she told her staff, "we move quickly. No delays, no special treatment." Her words became policy, then practice, then tradition. Tiana's story appeared in law school textbooks as an example of how swift justice could work. Students studied the timeline, from incident to arrest in less than an hour, from arrest to charges in less than a day. It became a benchmark for what was possible when the system worked as intended. Community meetings at the precinct changed too. People spoke more openly, officers listened more carefully. The wall between police and public began to crack, letting in light and understanding from both sides. Trust, once broken, began to heal. The rookie officer's body camera footage became a training tool nationwide. Departments used it to show both what went wrong and what went right, how one person's courage could stop injustice in its tracks. In her bedroom, Tiana finished getting ready for school. Her college acceptance letter lay on her desk, next to a news article about police reform. She touched her hair one last time, remembering her grandmother's words about crowns and strength. The crown had been taken, but something more powerful had grown in its place: purpose. Ready to go? A mother called from downstairs. Tiana grabbed her backpack, caught one final glimpse of herself in the mirror. The girl who looked back wasn't a victim. She was a catalyst, a changemaker, a reminder that justice could work when good people chose to act. The precinct had changed. The system had changed. But most importantly, people had changed. And that, Tiana knew, was how real transformation began: one person, one choice, one moment of courage at a time. The moment of arrest carried a weight that everyone in the precinct could feel. Officer Mitchell sat in the break room, his arrogance finally cracking as reality set in. The same handcuffs he had used on countless others now waited for his own wrists, a cold metal reminder that no one was above the law. 2 senior officers approached him, their faces set in professional masks. "Stand up," the taller one commanded, no trace of their previous camaraderie present in his voice. Mitchell's legs seemed to move in slow motion as he rose, his eyes fixed on the floor. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the suddenly silent room. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer began, reciting the Miranda rights with deliberate clarity. Each word seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning. Mitchell, who had spoken these same words hundreds of times before, now heard them from the other side. Outside the break room, other officers watched through the windows, their expressions a mix of sadness and satisfaction. Some had worked with Mitchell for years, had shared jokes and coffee breaks, but now they saw him clearly for what he was, a reminder that the badge was meant to protect, not intimidate. The booking process began with mechanical precision. Mitchell's fingerprints were taken, his belongings catalogued, his mugshot captured. The booking officer, a veteran of 20 years, handled everything with professional detachment. "Face forward," she instructed, adjusting the height marker behind him, now left profile. In the holding cell, Mitchell's uniform had been replaced with standard-issue jail clothes. The transformation was stark, from authority figure to inmate in less than an hour. He sat alone on the metal bench, the weight of his actions finally settling on his shoulders. The police union representative stood outside the cell, his face grim. "We can't help you with this one," he said, his words clipped and final. "What you did, there's no defending it." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Upstairs, the district attorney reviewed the charging documents one final time. Each charge was carefully worded, backed by solid evidence. Civil rights violations, assault, abuse of power. The list was comprehensive. "No deals on this one," she told her assistant. "We goed for maximum penalties." Tiana and her parents watched from the chief's office as Mitchell was led to the transport vehicle. The sight of him in handcuffs didn't bring joy, but it did bring a sense of justice being served. "This is what accountability looks like," Tiana's father said softly, his arm around his daughter's shoulders. The transport van's doors closed with a heavy thud. Inside, Mitchell sat where so many of his former arrestees had sat before. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all the transport officers who maintained a professional silence during the short drive to the county jail. At the jail, word had already spread about who was coming in. The intake officers processed Mitchell with cool efficiency, their usual banter notably absent. His former badge offered no privileges here, he was just another inmate being processed into the system. The jail cell door closed behind him with a final sounding clang. Mitchell stood in the small space, the reality of his situation finally hitting home. The power he had abused so casually was gone, replaced by the consequences of his actions. Back at the precinct, the chief held another press conference. "Today, we showed that justice can be swift when the evidence is clear and the will to act is present," he stated, his voice firm. "No one is above the law, especially those sworn to uphold it." The rookie officer who had recorded everything sat at her desk, completing her detailed report. Her colleagues stopped by periodically, some offering quiet words of support, others simply nodding in approval. She had chosen right over easy, and that choice had made all the difference. In the courthouse, the judge signed the final processing orders. Each signature represented another step in the swift path to justice that this case had taken. "Make sure these are filed immediately," he instructed his clerk. "This case takes priority." The district attorney's office hummed with purpose as staff members moved with unusual urgency. The sun was barely past its peak, but the wheels of justice were turning at record speed. The head district attorney stood at her desk, phone in one hand, warrant in the other, her voice carrying the weight of 2 decades of prosecutorial experience. "We have more than enough for immediate action," she spoke into her phone, eyeing the footage playing silently on her computer screen. "Body camera evidence, multiple witnesses, clear civil rights violations. We're moving now." Her team had dropped everything else to focus on this case, understanding that swift action wasn't just possible, it was necessary. In the courthouse across town, a judge reviewed the warrant application with careful attention. His chambers, usually a place of quiet contemplation, now felt like the eye of a storm. He'd seen thousands of cases cross his desk, but few with such clear-cut evidence and urgent need for action. Meanwhile, at the precinct, internal affairs investigators continued their systematic documentation. Every officer who had been present was interviewed, their statements recorded and transcribed. The rookie officer's body camera footage played on multiple screens, each viewing revealing new details that strengthened the case. "Walk me through it again," the lead investigator said, his pen poised over his notepad. The rookie officer sat straight in her chair, her voice steady as she recounted the events. Other officers waited their turn to provide statements, the usual blue wall of silence crumbling in the face of undeniable evidence. Tanana's parents worked from a makeshift office in the precinct's conference room, their legal expertise turning pain into purpose. Her mother coordinated with civil rights organizations, while her father prepared preliminary legal documents. Their phones buzzed constantly with messages of support from colleagues across the country. "The arraignment needs to happen today," Tiana's mother insisted during a call with the court clerk. "This isn't just about one incident, it's about showing that the system can work when it wants to." Her voice carried the authority of someone who had fought similar battles before, but never one so personal. Outside, news crews maintained their vigil, their satellite trucks lining the street like sentries. Reporters updated their stories in real time, many commenting on the unprecedented speed of the official response. This wasn't the usual story of delayed action and denied accountability. This was something new. The police chief emerged from another press briefing, his uniform crisp despite the long hours. "We're setting a new standard today," he told his command staff. "Every department in the country will be watching how we handle this." His words carried both pride and pressure. They had to get this right. Back at the district attorney's office, the warrant was finally ready. The judge's signature, still wet on the page, represented more than just legal authorization. It was a statement that the old ways of handling police misconduct were over. Tiana sat with a victim advocate, sharing her story for the official record. Her voice remained strong, though her hands occasionally brushed against her shortened hair, a reflexive gesture that spoke volumes about the trauma she'd endured. The advocate took detailed notes, knowing that every word would matter in the case to come. "You're helping change things," the advocate said softly during a break. "Your courage today will protect others tomorrow." Tiana managed a small smile, understanding that her personal tragedy had somehow transformed into something larger than herself. The arrest warrant moved through official channels with unprecedented speed. At each step, people who normally waited for others to act found themselves pushing things forward instead. The usual bureaucratic delays dissolved in the face of clear evidence and public attention. In the precinct's booking area, officers prepared for what would come next. They'd arrested countless people in their careers, but taking one of their own into custody, that was different. Yet the evidence left no room for hesitation or doubt. The district attorney herself headed to the precinct, file in hand. Her heels clicked against the floor tiles, the sound mixing with the general buzz of activity. She had prosecuted police officers before, but never this quickly, never with such clear cause and public support. "Everything's by the book," she reminded her team. "We do this right, do it fast, and make it stick." Her words echoed what everyone was thinking. This case could set precedents for how similar incidents were handled in the future. The department's public information officer approached with care, a preliminary statement in hand. "Would you like to review this?" she asked Tiana's parents. "We want to make sure we get this right." It was a small gesture, but it represented a larger shift, the acknowledgement that the old ways of handling such incidents were over. The police chief's office had never felt smaller as he stood before the assembled press, his uniform pressed and medals gleaming under the harsh camera lights. His usual confidence was tempered by the gravity of the situation, but his voice rang clear and firm as he addressed the crowd. What happened in our precinct today was not just a violation of policy, it was a violation of basic human dignity and civil rights, he began, each word carefully chosen but spoken from the heart. The cameras clicked and whirred, capturing every expression, every gesture. Behind the scenes, things moved at lightning speed. Internal affairs investigators worked with military precision, gathering statements, securing evidence, and ensuring every procedural box was checked. The rookie officer's body camera footage had already been downloaded to multiple secure servers, guaranteeing its preservation. Tiana sat in a private office, surrounded by her parents and civil rights advocates who had arrived within minutes of hearing the news. A skilled hairstylist, known for helping trauma survivors, had been called in to help salvage what remained of her hair. The stylist worked gently, turning the brutal cuts into something that, while short, at least looked intentional. "You're doing great, sweetie," the stylist murmured as she worked, her hands steady and sure. "We're going to make this work." In the mirror, Tiana watched her reflection transform, not into what she had been, but into something new, a visual reminder of her strength and resilience. Outside the office, the precinct buzzed with activity. Officers who had worked with Mitchell over the years came forward with stories they had previously kept to themselves. The wall of silence that often protected bad officers was crumbling, brick by brick, as people realized that change was actually possible. The district attorney had set up a temporary command center in one of the conference rooms. Papers covered every surface as her team built their case. "The beauty of this," she told her assistant, "is its simplicity. No gray areas, no room for interpretation." The camera caught everything. News helicopters circled overhead, their rotors creating a constant background rhythm to the day's events. Social media exploded with updates, but for once, the story wasn't about justice delayed. It was about justice in action. The police union representatives sat in another room, their faces grim as they drafted a statement. "We support good officers," the statement would read, "but we cannot and will not defend actions that betray the public trust." It was a departure from their usual stance, and a signal that times were truly changing. Tiana's father paced the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated with other civil rights attorneys. This case would set precedents, create new standards for swift action and accountability. His daughter's trauma would become a catalyst for change, though that knowledge did little to ease his pain as a parent. The rookie officer who had recorded everything found herself surrounded by supporters. Veteran officers stopped by her desk, some offering quiet words of approval, others simply nodding in recognition of her courage. She had chosen right over comfortable, and in doing so, had shown others the way. Mitchell's processing continued with methodical precision. Each step was documented, every procedure followed to the letter. His former colleagues handled him with professional detachment, their faces masks of controlled disappointment. The clicks of handcuffs echoed through the booking area, a sound that usually meant justice for others, now meaning justice for one of their own. Back in the chief's office, preparations were underway for what would come next. Policy changes were already being drafted, training programs revised. "We're not just handling one incident," the chief told his command staff. "We're changing the culture." Tiana's mother worked her legal connections, ensuring that every relevant civil rights organization was aware and involved. Her phone barely stopped ringing as colleagues reached out, offering support, resources, and expertise. This case would not be fought alone. The precinct's community liaison officer had his hands full managing the growing crowd outside. People had begun gathering, not in protest but in support. They carried signs expressing solidarity with Tiana and demanding continued accountability from law enforcement. As the afternoon wore on, Tiana emerged from the office with her newly styled hair. The physical transformation was striking, but it was the look in her eyes that caught everyone's attention. There was steel there now, tempered by experience but unbroken. The district attorney emerged from her impromptu office in a borrowed conference room, warrant in hand. "It's done," she announced, her voice carrying across the lobby. "We're charging him with civil rights violations, assault, and abuse of power." The words rang out like church bells, clear and impossible to ignore. Tiana stood up, her mother's jacket still around her shoulders. In the precinct windows, she caught a glimpse of her reflection, her hair brutally shortened but her spine straight, her eyes clear. She might have lost her locks, but she had gained something else. A first-hand understanding of why her parents had chosen their careers, why justice mattered so much. The precinct's main lobby had transformed into an impromptu command center. Tiana's parents, both respected civil rights attorneys, moved with the precision of people who had spent their lives preparing for moments like this. Her mother's phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues, while her father spoke in low, intense tones with the police chief. "Baby, look at me," Tiana's mother said, gently tilting her daughter's chin up. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on what remained of Tiana's hair, making the uneven cuts look even more severe. "We're going to make this right." The words carried the weight of 2 decades of courtroom victories and hard-fought battles for justice. The rookie officer who had recorded everything sat at her desk, surrounded by internal affairs investigators. Her hands shook slightly as she transferred the footage to their secure servers, but her voice was steady as she described what she had witnessed. "I knew something was wrong the moment he brought her in," she explained, her rookie status giving way to her training and integrity. "There's no policy about hair. He made that up." Down the hall, the police chief paced in his office, his face growing darker with each replay of the body camera footage. 25 years on the force, and he'd never seen such a blatant abuse of power caught so clearly on camera. The timestamps couldn't be disputed. Less than 30 minutes had passed since Tiana was first brought in. Outside, news vans were already pulling up, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal trees. The story had leaked, as stories like this always do. But this time, the narrative wouldn't be controlled by press releases and carefully worded statements. The truth was already spreading across social media, carried by the silent witness of the body camera footage. Tiana sat wrapped in her mother's suit jacket, watching the activity swirl around her. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a strange kind of clarity. She thought about her college application essays again, about the question asking what justice meant to her. Now she had an answer, written not in words but in experience. The district attorney arrived, striding through the doors with purpose. She took one look at Tiana, at the scattered hair still on the floor of the holding room, and pulled out her phone. "Get me a judge," she barked into it. Now, in her 30 years of prosecuting cases, she'd learned that sometimes justice needed to move at the speed of light. Tiana's father emerged from a conference room, his face showing the first signs of relief. "They're expediting everything," he told his wife and daughter. "The footage is irrefutable." His hand rested on Tiana's shoulder, gentle but firm, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. The rookie officer approached them hesitantly, holding a cup of hot chocolate from the break room. "I thought you might want this," she said to Tiana, her eyes full of apology for not stepping in sooner. Tiana accepted the cup with a small smile, understanding the officer's position and appreciating her courage in recording everything. In the detention area, Mitchell sat in the same kind of chair he'd forced Tiana into, but now he was the one being processed. His badge and gun had been taken, his uniform would soon be replaced by civilian clothes. The same officers who had walked past earlier now moved with purpose, documenting everything, following every procedure to the letter. There would be no procedural mistakes to exploit later. The police union representative stood in a corner, his face grim as he watched the process unfold. He'd already made the call. They wouldn't be providing legal representation. Some actions were indefensible, and this was one of them. Mitchell would face the consequences alone. Tiana's mother worked her phone like a conductor leading an orchestra of justice. One call to a trusted journalist friend, another to a civil rights organization, a text to a sympathetic judge. Each communication was a piece of the puzzle, ensuring that this incident wouldn't be buried or forgotten. The precinct's atmosphere had shifted completely. Officers who had been present during the incident wrote their statements, their faces showing a mix of shame and determination. They had failed to stop this, but they could make sure it was properly documented now. A social media manager from the department frantically refreshed her feeds, watching the story spread like wildfire. But unlike many police incidents that went viral, this one came with its own resolution. The department's swift action was already part of the narrative, a rare instance of immediate accountability. The holding room felt smaller by the minute as Officer Mitchell circled Tiana like a predator sizing up its prey. The scissors in his hand caught the harsh fluorescent light, a metallic gleam that seemed to mock everything the badge on his chest was supposed to represent. Tiana's reflection in the two-way mirror showed her sitting perfectly still, her face a mask of calm that belied the storm of emotions underneath. "You think those fancy clothes and that hair make you special." Mitchell's words dripped with contempt as he grabbed a handful of her locks. The rookie officer by the door shifted uncomfortably, her body camera silently capturing every second. Her hand hovered near her radio, knowing that what she was witnessing wasn't just wrong, it was criminal. The first snip of the scissors echoed like a gunshot in the small room. Tiana's carefully maintained locks, grown over years of patience and pride, began falling to the floor. Each cut was deliberate, meant to humiliate rather than follow any imaginary policy Mitchell claimed to be enforcing. But what he didn't realize was that with every lock of hair that fell, he was cutting away at his own career, his own freedom. "Sir, I need to document this," the rookie officer said, her voice steadier than she felt. It was a smart move, making it clear she was recording while giving herself plausible deniability about her true intentions. Mitchell barely glanced her way, too caught up in his power trip to notice the noose he was placing around his own neck. Tiana focused on her breathing, just like she'd learned in her meditation app. In out, in out. She thought about her college essay, sitting half-finished on her laptop. The prompt asked about a moment that defined her character. Well, she was living that moment now, wasn't she? Her hands remained folded in her lap, refusing to give Mitchell the satisfaction of seeing them shake. The precinct's usual morning bustle seemed muted, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Through the glass, officers walked past, some averting their eyes, others slowing down with concerned looks. One senior detective stopped completely, watching for a moment before turning sharply on his heel and heading straight for the captain's office. Mitchell's running commentary became background noise as Tiana retreated into her thoughts. She remembered her grandmother braiding her hair on Sunday afternoons, telling stories about their family's history. "Your hair carries your strength," she'd say, working coconut oil through each strand. "It's a crown you were born with." Now, watching pieces of that crown scatter across the dirty precinct floor, Tiana felt not defeat, but a rising anger that burned cold and clear. The rookie officer's body camera caught everything. The casual cruelty in Mitchell's movements, the quiet dignity in Tiana's posture, the growing pile of hair around the chair. But more importantly, it caught the moment when everything changed. The door burst open, bringing with it a gust of justice that had been long overdue. The police chief stood in the doorway, his face a thundercloud of contained fury. Behind him, Tiana's parents radiated a controlled rage that filled the room like electricity before a storm. The scissors froze mid-snip as Mitchell finally realized the magnitude of his mistake. "Officer Mitchell," the chief's voice could have frozen fire, "step away from the young lady. Now." Each word fell like a hammer blow in the sudden silence. The rookie officer's camera captured Mitchell's expression shifting from arrogant authority to dawning fear as reality caught up with him. Tiana's mother moved forward, her courtroom heels clicking against the floor like a countdown. She draped her suit jacket around her daughter's shoulders, a gesture of protection that came far too late but carried all the weight of what was to come. Her father stood in the doorway, phone in hand, already dialing numbers that would set the wheels of justice in motion. The precinct erupted into controlled chaos. Internal affairs officers seemed to materialize from thin air, their badges glinting as they read Mitchell his rights. The rookie officer handed over her body camera without being asked, knowing its contents would be the key to everything that followed. As Mitchell was led away, his protests falling on deaf ears, Tiana finally allowed herself to reach up and feel what remained of her hair. Uneven chunks and rough edges where her beautiful locks had been. But as her mother's arms wrapped around her, she realized something important. Mitchell had tried to take her crown, but in doing so, he'd given her something else. A cause. The story was already spreading through the building, through text messages and hushed conversations. Officers gathered in small groups, some shaking their heads, others looking ashamed. The thin blue line had just gotten a little thinner, and not everyone was unhappy about it. The story could have ended differently. It could have been another incident buried in paperwork, another complaint lost in the system. But times had changed, and this police department, like many across the country, was learning that accountability wasn't optional anymore. The rookie officer's quiet courage, Tiana's dignity in the face of abuse, and her parents' unwavering advocacy were about to show just how quickly justice could move when the system worked as it should. It was a crisp autumn morning when Tiana pulled her second-hand Honda Civic into the left lane, heading to her part-time job at the local library. She'd saved up for months to buy the car, working weekends and summers while maintaining her spot on the honor roll. The morning sun caught the freshly waxed hood. She'd spent Sunday afternoon detailing it with her dad, a moment of peace before her busy week ahead. The flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror made her heart skip. Tiana checked her speed, 32 in a 35 zone. She'd been extra careful since getting her license 6 months ago, knowing that even a minor traffic stop could mean trouble. Her parents had taught her well. Turn on the interior light, keep your hands visible, stay calm. Officer Mitchell watched her car for a full minute before approaching, his boots crunching on fallen leaves. He was new to this precinct but not to the force, 15 years in, with a personnel file thick with civilian complaints that somehow never stuck. His knock on her window was unnecessarily hard, making Tiana flinch. "License and registration," he barked, not even looking at her face. Tiana reached slowly for her glove compartment, narrating her movements just like her parents had practiced with her. "I'm reaching for my registration now, sir." Her voice was steady, masking the tremor in her hands. The next few moments played out like a slow-motion nightmare. Mitchell claimed he smelled something suspicious, a false pretense that would later be torn apart in the investigation. Despite Tiana's polite protests and clear record, he ordered her out of the car. Her phone slipped from her lap as she stepped out, the screen lighting up with a text from her supervisor, "Hope you're okay, running a bit late." At the precinct, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Mitchell led Tiana past the front desk. The desk sergeant looked up briefly, then back down, a moment of failed intervention that would haunt him later. The holding area was empty except for a rookie officer doing paperwork, her presence about to become crucial to the story's outcome. Tiana sat straight-backed in the hard plastic chair, her grandmother's words echoing in her head, "Your dignity is something they can't take unless you let them." Her natural hair, carefully maintained locks that had taken years to grow, had been a source of pride and connection to her heritage. She watched Mitchell's reflection in the window as he disappeared into another room, returning with something that made her blood run cold. A pair of station scissors. "Policy violation," he muttered, though no such policy existed. The rookie officer's hand moved slowly to her body camera, pressing the record button as her training warred with her disbelief at what she was witnessing. The quiet whir of the camera would later be heard in the footage, a small sound that would lead to massive change. In those terrifying moments before help arrived, Tiana focused on the clock on the wall, its second hand ticking away like a countdown. She thought about her college application sitting on her desk at home, her dreams of becoming a civil rights attorney like her parents, the scholarship interviews scheduled for next week. She didn't know that down the hall, the rookie officer was already sending urgent messages up the chain of command. The morning shift captain was completing routine paperwork when the alerts started popping up on his computer. Body camera footage uploaded directly to the secure server flagged for immediate review. His coffee grew cold as he watched the scene unfold on his monitor, his face hardening with each passing second. 23 years on the force had taught him to act fast when things went wrong, and this was wrong on every level. The story was already spreading through the station like wildfire. Phones buzzed with text messages, veteran officers exchanged knowing looks, and a sense of impending reckoning filled the air. Mitchell's reputation had finally caught up with him, and this time there would be no sweeping it under the rug. As Tiana's parents rushed through the precinct doors, her mother still in court attire from an interrupted trial, her father carrying his ever-present briefcase filled with civil rights precedents, they'd found a scene already transformed. The police chief himself was there, having broken away from a city council meeting the moment he received the alert. Mitchell's smug confidence had disappeared, replaced by the dawning realization that he had finally gone too far.